Hello, how are you doing? My name is Alex Vasquez, and I am one of the Security Solutions Architects for Accudata Systems, based out of Houston. Been with Accudata for 6 years, and I help cover our security practice as well as certain aspects of our data center practice, specifically around application delivery controllers. And today I'd like to talk with you all about why SSL decryption matters, why it should be at the forefront of your mind in terms of your security strategy. And so let's step through a little bit about why SSL decryption matters. First off, I want to start off by reviewing the agenda for what we are about to walk through today. So first, we'll talk about what is SSL and why it's so prevalent in our industry. We'll talk a little bit about how SSL is changing, talk a little bit about why SSL is a security risk, and then we'll look at justifications for SSL intercept, including the return on investments that are associated with implementing an SSL intercept solution. Then we'll look at more the technical level of the different directions in which we can intercept SSL, a few common deployment methods, as well as some of the common challenges or potential pitfalls you may come across when engaging in an SSL intercept solution. So with that being said, let's get started. So first off, what is SSL? SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and it has a successor, which is called TLS, or Transport Layer Security. And so without SSL, there's a lot of things that we could not do on the internet securely. For instance, online banking, right, like Bank of America, Chase.com, right, to go on there and look at our accounts, look at our account statements, update our information, make payments, right? It would be difficult to do that securely if we didn't have an encrypted channel to maintain our privacy or ensure our privacy and confidentiality. Then there's also online health services, where we may want to go look at our health information, again, look at medical payments, prescriptions that may have been prescribed to us, right? Just personal health information. But that doesn't necessarily explain why it's so prevalent, right? Because those use cases make sense, right, in terms of security and having a way to maintain confidentiality so we can interact with those services. How about submitting your taxes online? I'm sure there's a lot of people who use TurboTax. Imagine submitting your taxes online without having some sort of secure channel, right, encrypted channel to do so. But even then, it doesn't fully explain why it's so prevalent in our industry today. Because the truth is, SSL is used on a much, much broader scale. For instance, take Netflix. Netflix is a streaming media application, and it uses SSL. How about Facebook and Twitter? They are also enabled for SSL. So we have social media utilizing SSL. How about search engines like Google? They utilize SSL. So what we're starting to see is that beyond just financial and healthcare, there is an adoption of SSL on a much broader scale. What is driving this? What is driving this wide adoption of SSL? And it's privacy. It's the scope of what privacy means to us in today's day of age. So back in the day, it was more concerned about attackers or malicious actors, right, gaining access to our data, our encrypted data. But now, some people may be more concerned about internet service providers being able to also look at people's browsing activity and sell that off to marketing firms. And then some of us might even be concerned about certain governments, maybe even our own government, looking at our own traffic. So the truth is that the awareness of having privacy or the means to maintain confidentiality is not just understood by enterprise, but now even consumers are aware of the importance of maintaining privacy or confidentiality when browsing the internet. And so this helps explain the paradigm of why SSL has grown in adoption and is used for much, much more than the common financial and healthcare use cases. So now let's talk a little bit about what are the three main things that confidentiality gives us. So the first thing is going to be confidentiality. So SSL provides us confidentiality by means of encryption. So the data that we exchange over the internet is encrypted, and only he or she who has the key can decrypt that data and view it. And so this is an analogy of this is back in the day when spy rings used to try to exchange information with their peers, and they needed to do it securely so their enemies couldn't view their secret messages. They would develop techniques, right, in which to encrypt their messages to ensure that unwanted eyes did not view those messages and the messages weren't compromised. So in the same way, today we encrypt our messages to securely exchange our data, and to prevent unwanted eyes from viewing that data. SSL also gives us integrity, and it does this through a means of what's called hashing. So we take our packets and we calculate, right, using an algorithm, a hash, this unique value, right, in relation to that packet. And once we generate that hash value, we send the packet along with that hash value. So when the recipient receives that packet, they also run the same algorithm with the expectations to have the same output, the same hash value. And if that hash value is changed in any way, then that is indicative that the message was potentially tampered with or compromised while in transit. So a good analogy for that is going to be like a wax seal placed on a letter to seal a letter, right? And so if that wax seal was broken in any way, that was indicative that the message was potentially compromised, right? And that the message was potentially tampered with. And so in the same way, hashing provides us indications as to whether our packets may have been compromised while in transit through hashing. So confidentiality, integrity, and last, SSL gives us a sense of assurance or trust, right, through certificate trust. And so when we establish these SSL connections, we're presented a certificate, and that certificate, right, should be signed by a certificate authority that our web browsers trust, based on the certificates that reside within the Trusted Root Store. And so this is very similar, right, to when you walk into a restaurant and you look up on one of their walls and you see various certifications and documents, such as fire code safety certification or health inspection certification. And then sometimes you may even see a document that says that they have been recognized as an official legitimate business within the state of Texas. When you see these documents, it gives you a sense of trust that I've walked into a legitimate official establishment or business, and you can feel safe to do business, right, with that vendor. So much in the same way, when we receive a certificate that is signed by somebody that we trust, we have that sense of trust to know that we are accessing a legitimate, secure website. So confidentiality, integrity, and assurance. Those are the three main things that SSL provides us. So now that we understand the value of SSL, what is SSL and why it's so prevalent, let's talk a little bit about how SSL works in terms of the SSL Handshake. So this will be a cursory overview of the SSL Handshake. There's actually a lot more going on underneath the hood, but we're just going to focus on the meat and potatoes. First off, as part of the SSL Handshake, let's say we have a client that's going to talk or establish a connection with Facebook, for instance. And in this case, what we're actually going to do is utilize both asymmetric cryptography in order to enable us to use symmetric cryptography. So the asymmetric cryptography is going to be utilizing a public key and private key. And the symmetric cryptography is going to be creating what are called session keys. And so the asymmetric cryptography, or that public key, private key, right, is going to allow us to safely negotiate the symmetric keys, or these session keys. So let's go ahead and walk through this, and it'll make more sense. So to start off, our client, or our web browser, sends a hello packet to the Facebook server. It says hello. As part of that hello, the client tells the server what version of TLS it would like to negotiate, and it also provides a list of cipher suites in the order of its preference, as well as what is called a pseudo-random function, which will later be used to create the symmetric keys or session keys. So once the client sends that to the server receives that packet, looks at the version of TLS that the client wants to negotiate, chooses a cipher suite out of the list of cipher suites that were provided in the order of preference. And at that point, the server then responds back with its certificate. So at this point, the client now receives the certificate, the server certificate, which has the public key embedded in it. And now the client takes that server certificate and it validates the certificate. Can I trust the certificate? Who signed it? Let me look at the common name, see if it matches the website. Look at the expiration. Has it expired? Right? It does a revocation check to see if the certificate has been revoked by the certificate authority. After it goes through all these steps to validate the certificate, including the authenticity or integrity of the certificate, if everything checks out, right, then the client will take the public key from that certificate and it will use it to encrypt what is called a pre-master secret. And that pre-master secret is actually what the client and the server use in order to generate these session keys or these symmetric keys. So that's where the symmetric cryptography comes in, right? But we have to be able to send that securely to the server so the server can also generate the same key on its end. So that's where we're using the public key, private key relationship, right? So in this case, we're using the public key to encrypt the pre-master secret and all the relative information that's required to generate what's called a master secret, which is then in turn used to create what's called the session keys or symmetric keys. So we encrypt that message, we send it to the server uses its private key to decrypt the message, extracts the pre-master, generates the master secret, and then generates the same session key that's also generated by the client. And that is the form of encryption that we actually use to do the bulk encryption, right? All the messages sent from then on are then using those symmetric keys. So at that point, the client says, I'm done. Server says, I'm done. And then you are off to the races exchanging data securely. So that is a cursory overview of the SSL Handshake. So now let's talk a little bit about how is SSL changing in our industry. What are some of the things that we need to be aware of? So first off, there's a push for RSA 4096-bit keys. So back in the day, we used to use 1024-bit keys, RSA keys, and that was the standard. And everybody felt that, hey, that is secure enough, that is strong enough encryption. And some smart dudes over in Harvard were able to break the encryption. And so the industry responded back and said, okay, well, we need to increase the strength of our encryption. So 2048 is the standard. And RSA 2048-bit keys are actually the standard today. But that may be changing. Because according to Moore's law, right, things are going to be advancing at a much faster and a more alarming rate. So the compute power that we have at our disposal today is going to be much, much higher in the near future. And so with more compute power that we can throw at trying to break these encryptions, right, the less effective things like 2048-bit keys will potentially be in the future. Just like the 1024-bit keys, it might be the same case for 2048-bit keys in the future. They may not be strong enough. So there's going to be a potential adoption in the future for 4096-bit keys. But what does that mean to you? Well, it is more computationally intensive to use 4096-bit keys. So this could potentially impact the performance of the systems or solutions that we use that are going to be interacting with these keys, using these keys to decrypt and encrypt data. So that's something we need to be aware of. How are we going to scale as the industry continues to adopt stronger encryption? Next, there's what is called elliptic curve cryptography. And elliptic curve cryptography is based on the algebraic structure of an elliptic curve. Basically what you're seeing an example of at the bottom of this screen here. And so what does this mean to you? I mean, elliptic curve cryptography has been around for a while, but what does this mean to you? Well, let me put things in perspective. A 256-bit elliptic curve key has the same security effectiveness, the same encryption strength as a 3072-bit RSA key. So it's a lot more efficient, right? This means we could use a 2048-bit elliptic curve key, and it'll blow away a 2048 RSA-bit key. Much stronger. So much stronger while still maintaining the same performance requirements. But what does this mean to you? It means that we need to make sure that the systems that we use, right, to encrypt and decrypt data, that they can also support negotiating elliptic curve cipher suites. Because if we're not able to utilize or negotiate those cipher suites that use elliptic curve cryptography, we may be watering down our security. And we have to choose less effective, efficient cipher suites. Another thing is going to be perfect forward secrecy. So perfect forward secrecy prevents somebody from recording all your data today, and then if in the future, if they were to compromise the keys, they can't go back and compromise that past data. Right? Because it's actually using random keys. They're temporary keys or ephemeral keys. So perfect forward secrecy, that's great. What a great security advancement. But again, it's going to be the same thing with elliptic curve cryptography. We need to make sure that the systems that we have in place that are going to be using these keys or using these cipher suites, right, that they're able to support perfect forward secrecy. Now, this is really important because it really kind of leads into the next topic here. TLS 1.3. So a working draft of TLS 1.3 started back in July 2016. It's actually already being supported by certain search engines out there. The TLS 1.3 is fundamentally different than TLS 1.2 and everything before that. TLS 1.2, the definition of a cipher suite was defining authentication, bulk encryption, the key exchange algorithm, the message authentication code algorithm, as well as the pseudo-random function. But with TLS 1.3, the definition of a cipher suite is only going to be defining the bulk encryption algorithm and the hash message authentication code algorithm. The negotiation of the version of TLS will be done through TLS extensions. So that means there's going to be a whole new list of cipher suites that only pertain to 1.3, and it will not be backwards compatible. And all those cipher suites will support perfect forward secrecy. They will be enabled to use perfect forward secrecy. So we need to be prepared to be able to support TLS 1.3 and also be prepared to support the cipher suites that it will come along with. Lastly, there is a protocol called the Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP. And this is actually the successor to Certificate Revocation List. So high level, what happens here is that when clients go to a server, right, they want to perform an SSL handshake. As part of the SSL handshake, the server provides its server certificate. And so at that point, the client will use OCSP to establish a separate connection to the certificate authority that signed the certificate to perform a revocation check. Hey, has this certificate been revoked? Right? That is OCSP in a nutshell. If it's not revoked, SSL handshake continues forward, is established, and they're off to the races. However, there was a challenge that was encountered with OCSP. So imagine a high volume, high transactional website that had hundreds and hundreds of clients that were accessing that service. And all those clients are all going and establishing their own separate connection to the certificate authority just to do a revocation lookup. Imagine the performance impact on the certificate authorities. Right? So now they have to also support the high volume of clients just to do revocation checks. So the guys who invented OCSP, right, who had a hand in it, came back and added what's called OCSP stapling. The OCSP stapling improves OCSP by, instead of all the clients, right, the hundreds of clients, thousands of clients, all going to the certificate authorities to do these revocation checks, instead the server, on behalf of the client, goes to the certificate authority and asks for basically this ticket or this pass, right, temporary pass that says, hey, give me this pass that says that I have not been revoked yet for a certain amount of time. And so when the client establishes this connection with me, I will staple on that pass or that ticket, right, with my certificate so that the client doesn't have to go to the certificate authority to ask, hey, has this certificate been revoked? That response is already stapled to the server certificate. And now the client just looks at that once, right, and then if it's not been revoked yet, then obviously it can continue forward to establish SSL handshake. So that improves the performance, right? Especially on behalf of the certificate authorities. So what does that mean to you? We need to be able to support OCSP and also be able to support OCSP stapling with any solutions that we have upstream from our clients that might be intercepting SSL. All right. So now that we've talked about what is SSL and why it's so great, how it's changing, let's talk a little bit about the dark side of SSL. What's the scary side? So let's play a game here real quick. Let's say we're going to form a hacking organization, and you're going to become a member of it today. But to be an official hacking organization, we have to have a name. We have to have a brand. And so I would love to call us anonymous, but anonymous has already been taken, unfortunately. So I went back to the drawing board and got my creative juices flowing, and I came up with a name. So I figured we could be called Synonymous, right? Very different, very unique. We'll stand out from everybody else. So let's get down to business. We are creating a piece of malware, right, that will infect our targets, right, will infect the host, and then once it infects the host, establishes a command and control connection back to our command and control server. But we want to make sure when that malware tries to do so, or while it tries to establish that command and control connection outbound, that it has the least amount of chances of being detected by our target's network security tools. What protocol do you think we could use to do that? Knowing that most customers, most companies do not have an SSL strategy or have a solution to intercept SSL. Well, if you're thinking, Alex, SSL, let's use that. It encrypts our data, and most people aren't able to intercept it. Bingo. There's a lot of other tools we could use, like DNS tunneling, right? Or using a non-standard port. But why? SSL is easily at our disposal. So let's talk a little bit about why. What's the justification in that? Well, let's put things in perspective. According to statistics, more than 50% of all internet traffic is encrypted today. And that number just continues to rise. So that poses the challenges for a lot of companies. It's not just related to attacks, but also data loss and insider threats or disgruntled employees. The statistics also show that 100% of all attacks will be encrypted in 2017. Well, last I checked, it's 2017. So whether or not that's true or not, the truth is most malware these days will be utilizing encryption to be able to hide their activities from your network security tools. Have you heard of WannaCry? WannaCry used SSL as part of its attack. There was also the Game Over Zeus malware that led to millions and millions of dollars in losses for banks all over the world. And it was so persistent and it was so effective because it used SSL to hide its activities. But this is a justification, right, for addressing SSL because we know that it is a vector, a common vector and a growing vector for attacks going forward. So let's dive a little bit into the justifications of intercepting SSL or decrypting SSL. So what's essentially happening? We have these network security tools, and if we're not, intercepting SSL, we have an IPS, a web application firewall, network-based antivirus, right? Advanced malware detection boxes, sandboxing solutions, right? So the unencrypted traffic, right, flows right through them, and they do their job. They do them well. That's great. But if it's encrypted traffic, unless they're intercepting it and decrypting it and allowing their engines to inspect it, it's essentially bypassing those network security tools. So then those network security tools have to rely on other features such as IP reputation filtering or dynamic IP filtering, right, based on the reputation of the IP. But the thing is, most attackers spin up domains overnight, right? They're using IPs that don't have a reputation yet. So it's limited. And then some solutions may be using protocol anomaly detection. Right? They're looking for anomalies in the traffic streams. Well, good luck with that. right? Good luck with blocking in real time with something like that. All right? Imagine the potential for false positives. So the truth is, unless we intercept the SSL traffic that we can, we are relying on other limited network security features to protect us and to give us visibility. So I listed off a lot of the common network security tools, and here I have them on this slide here. So I have a next-gen firewall, I have an intrusion prevention system or intrusion detection system, however you want to deploy it. Advanced malware solution, a web application firewall, maybe a solution that provides application visibility, distributed denial of service, protection solutions. So let's say we invested $5,000 in each one of these solutions. And you're probably thinking, Alex, you're crazy. I spent triple that amount of money on my solution, if not thousands and thousands of dollars more on my solutions. That's great. This is just an example to put things in perspective. So if we invested $5,000 in each one of these solutions, and 50% of our traffic, our internet traffic, is encrypted, well, this is essentially a 50% hit to the return on investment that we've made on these solutions. Because 50% of that traffic, we can't really do anything about. We can't inspect it. So if it costs us $30,000, to purchase all these solutions, and we took a 50% hit to the return on investment, then that's about a $15,000 loss in return on investment year over year. And look at it from a risk perspective. If 50% of your internet traffic is encrypted and you can't really do anything about it, then that's essentially increasing your risk by about 50%. So there is a justification, a business justification for why you should develop an SSL strategy or develop a solution or strategy to intercept SSL and provide your network security tools the ability to achieve their true return on investment. So now let's talk a little bit about the different directions in which we can perform SSL intercept. So the two common directions are going to be inbound and outbound. So inbound, in that use case, we typically have web servers off in a DMZ, right? We have clients outside on the internet or external to our network that are accessing these applications. And then there's outbound, where we have clients on our trusted network or internal corporate network that are going out to the internet to browse the internet. And we're wanting to intercept their traffic so we can inspect it. So here's a high-level example of inbound decryption. So as you see here at the bottom, we have our web servers, right, that we're hosting that are public-facing or internet-facing. And then we have clients on the outside, on the internet, accessing these web servers. And then we have this SSL intercept appliance in between. And that SSL intercept appliance is essentially acting as a trusted man in the middle. So what happens here is that the client sends a hello, right, to the server. But in this case, the SSL intercept solution intercepts that hello. And it acts like he's the server. So he responds as if he's the server. Now on the back end, he acts like he's the client to the web servers. So he sends a hello to the web servers on the back to establish a secure connection on the back end. And so once you have a connection established between the client and the SSL intercept solution, and then another separate session or connection established between the SSL intercept solution and our web servers, now we have our trusted man in the middle attack. At that point, the data flowing through the SSL intercept appliance is decrypted. And now we have the potential to feed that decrypted traffic stream to all of our network security tools. So we could send it to an IPS, or we could send it to a web application firewall, or a DLP engine, right, or a next-gen firewall, right? So we have a lot of flexibility in order to decrypt once and feed it to multiple, numerous network security tools. So high level, that's inbound decryption. So inbound decryption is a little bit easier than outbound decryption. Let's talk about that model. So on outbound decryption, we have clients on our internal network, and they want to get out to the internet so they can browse the internet, browse the World Wide Web. So in this case, we have clients on the internal network, and then they're going out and they're accessing web servers, right, like Facebook. So in this case, the client again says hello to the server. But at this point, we have our SSL intercept appliance that's in between the communications path. So it intercepts the hello to the server, and he acts like he is the server and responds back to the client. On the back end, the SSL intercept appliance also sends a hello, as if it's the client, to the back-end web server, right? Let's say Facebook is our example here. So again, two separate connections are being established between the client and the SSL intercept appliance, and a separate connection between the SSL intercept appliance and the destined web server. Now this is where things differ a little bit from inbound decryption. Because we don't own or manage the servers, and since we don't own the private key on those servers, we don't own the certificate on those servers, we have to take a little bit different approach in this use case. So what actually happens here is that the web server, remember the web server responds with its server certificate, right, back to the client. So in this case, the SSL intercept appliance will receive the true certificate, right, as part of establishing the SSL connection between itself and the web server. Now, in order to establish a connection between the SSL intercept appliance and the client, right, on behalf of the web server, it uses what's called a subordinate certificate authority. And that subordinate certificate authority generates a server certificate on the fly. It actually takes attributes of the original server certificate, right, sent from the destined original web server, takes the common name and some other attributes, inputs that into that certificate that it generates on the fly, signs it with its subordinate certificate authority that's on the SSL intercept solution, and then presents that certificate to the client. So what does that mean? Well, that means that our client must trust the certificate or that subordinate certificate authority that we're using on our SSL intercept appliance. So that means you're going to have to distribute that certificate authority, root certificate, to our clients to make sure that they can trust the certificates that we're generating on the fly. But once that's all done, once the client is able to negotiate the SSL connection between the SSL intercept appliance and the SSL intercept appliance is able to negotiate the connection between itself and the web server, the original web server, then again, you're off to the races. The SSL intercept appliance is then able to see all the data decrypted and is able to feed that data to numerous network security tools like your IPS, your WAF, your DLP engines, etc., etc. So now let's talk a little bit about a few common deployment methods that you may come across in the industry when evaluating various SSL intercept solutions. So, the common deployment methods are either going to be solutions that deploy at layer 2 and solutions that deploy at layer 3. So when I talk layer 2, I'm talking about deploying it as a transparent bridge. And layer 3, right, is going to be in routed mode. And it could be physically inline, right, or you could route to it as if it's logically inline. We'll step through that in just a moment. So let's start off talking layer 2. So layer 2, we take our SSL intercept appliance, and in this use case or this example, right, let's say we have our core, and then upstream from the core is some sort of routing device, right? And so essentially we take our SSL intercept appliance and we put it in between that connection. So literally we're taking a cable and plugging it in from the core into our SSL intercept appliance, and then taking another cable, plugging that into the other end of the SSL intercept appliance and plugging that into our upstream router. So now it is layer 2, right, inline. Meaning we don't have to do there's no IP address changing, there's no routing changes that we need to make. So layer 2, off the bat, can appear a lot easier to deploy because there's a lot less overhead in terms of any re-architecture, right, or redesign that we need to do in terms of routing and IP addressing, and creating new subnets. So at that point, once we have that SSL intercept appliance in place, then it's a matter of integrating them with our network security tools. So let's recap on some of the characteristics of a layer 2 deployment. So again, usually you're not going to require any IP addressing needed for the data interfaces, right? You'll need an IP address for the management interface, but outside of that, for the data interfaces, it's typically based on port pairs, right? And therefore, there's not really a need for any routing changes. So the device is essentially transparent on the network, and it could appear to be easier to deploy. However, one of the things that you have to take in consideration is that because it is a layer 2 device and not a layer 3 device, there has to be a way to get the traffic that it's intercepting to our network security tools. So that means, in most cases, you have to plug your network security tools directly into the SSL intercept appliance. So port density on that SSL intercept appliance may be a challenge. You need to make sure you have enough ports to accommodate all the interfaces that your network security tools have. Now let's look at a layer 3 deployment model. So a layer 3 deployment model is going to look very similar to the layer 2, but in this case, right, we're going to have to do some IP addressing, and we're going to have to do some routing changes because we're inserting a layer 3 device in between existing networks. So there may be some overhead in terms of designing the network to accommodate implementing a layer 3 solution in your network. So once you have that solution in place, right, now it's all about integrating your network security tools. Now here's the value to a layer 3 deployment model, is that I can route, right, or feed that traffic to my network security tools without necessarily having to plug them directly into my SSL intercept appliance. That means port density is less of a concern. That also means certain solutions have the ability to group my network security tools and intelligently distribute the load amongst those network security tools, and also do health monitoring of those network security tools. So although there is some overhead, degree of overhead to a layer 3 deployment model, it also provides value in terms of scalability. And being able to have the flexibility to add more additional network security tools to these groups in order to scale as performance requirements and throughput requirements increase. So just to recap on those characteristics, right, there's going to be different ways to get traffic to our SSL intercept appliance. So I talked about physical inline and logically inline. So physically inline is basically what we saw in our deployment model, right? In order to get out to the internet, we have to route through this device. Traffic has to flow through the device. Logically in path is going to be a deployment model that could utilize something like policy-based routing. So if we don't want it physically inline and we only want to send 443 traffic over to our SSL intercept appliance, we could peel that traffic off using something like PBR, feed that traffic through our SSL intercept appliance, thus improving the performance of the SSL intercept appliance because it doesn't have to see all network traffic. So I see PBR being used a lot of times, especially in pilots, where people want to test it out without actually putting it in line with all their other network traffic. So other characteristics to recap on, again, there's routing changes that may need to be made and IP addressing, right, requirements around creating new subnets and VLANs. But then also the value that layer 3 deployment can potentially allow us, depending on the solution, to distribute the load of the traffic that we're intercepting and feed it to multiple appliances, right, allowing us a greater ability to scale. Thus meaning that port density is potentially less of a concern. So to wrap up, let's go ahead and review some of the common SSL challenges you may come across. And some of these I've already touched upon earlier in the presentation. One is elliptic curve, right? We need to be prepared to support elliptic curve cryptography. Take advantage of stronger encryption mechanisms that still allow us to maintain the same performance versus an RSA 2048-bit key, for example. We also need to be able to support forward secrecy with our SSL intercept solution, right? Because that brings us a lot of value. And with that, we need to be able to be prepared to support TLS 1.3, because all the cipher suites, right, that come along with TLS 1.3 will be enabled for forward secrecy. And now, another topic is physical access controls. So keep in mind, you're going to have a rack with all these devices along with your SSL intercept appliance, right, and the network security tools. And there's going to be this gap or this area, right, this logical part of your network where this traffic is going to be decrypted. And so if somebody had physical access to that rack, imagine the risks to your business, right, if they exploited that. So if you have an SSL intercept solution, you have your network security tools in this rack, you might want to consider having an enclosed rack that you could lock to prevent physical access to that rack to reduce your risks. Then another topic is pinning. So there's certificate pinning, and there's public key pinning, and then there's pinning that uses a form of hashing, essentially achieving the same thing. So with pinning, we're basically inserting information about the original certificate in our traffic stream, so when the client receives it and also receives the actual server certificate that it was presented, it can compare them to make sure that it has indeed been presented the true original server certificate. And if they don't match, right, then the client knows that, hey, I can't trust the server certificate that's been presented to me because it doesn't match what I am being told are the attributes of the actual true original certificate. So applications like Dropbox actually support certificate pinning. So there might be cases where we cannot intercept SSL due to pinning. So either you will need to bypass it, or it is something you need to bring up to the vendor of the SSL intercept solution that you're evaluating to see how they address cases where certificate pinning or public key pinning might be the case. Another thing is going to be bad certificates. Right? Remember, the SSL intercept solution is intercepting, right, SSL and establishing or negotiating SSL connections with the server on the client's behalf. So in the case where it's outbound, decryption model, our SSL intercept appliance, if it came across a bad certificate, if it was invalid or untrusted, how do we want the SSL intercept appliance to react? How do we want it to act in terms of, should it inform the client that the certificate is bad or invalid? Or should the SSL intercept appliance make the judgment call? Should it drop the connection? Well, look at it both ways. If the SSL intercept appliance just drops the connection because it's a bad certificate, and the client only sees, oops, sorry, something went wrong on their web browser, that clients could potentially be confused, and all of a sudden they're opening up a help desk support ticket and saying, hey, I can't get to this website. That could potentially lead to overhead and help desk calls. And then take the other end of the spectrum. Hey, let's just pass on the notification or the information about the certificate being bad or invalid to the client. Let's let the client make the decision. Right? That's the other far end of the spectrum. But that means we're going to have to trust our clients to make the right decision, the right judgment call. Do you really want that? Do you trust your clients to make that call? So that is something to evaluate. What is going to be our strategy when we come across bad certificates? And what are the options at our disposal with the SSL intercept solution that we may be evaluating? Another thing to take in consideration are unmanaged devices. Now, in some cases, you may not be able to have access to a device's root store, right? There might be some IoT devices you just do not have access to that part of the operating system. But in some cases, unmanaged devices, like mobile devices, like a smartphone, if it is a corporate managed smartphone, right, you may have the potential to use something like a mobile device management solution that has the ability to provision certificates to that endpoint. So you may be able to potentially use an MDM as part of your SSL intercept strategy for mobile devices. Something to consider. Another thing is going to be sizing. When you engage a vendor about an SSL intercept solution, they are going to ask you for metrics. And these metrics are extremely important to allow that vendor to accurately size out the SSL intercept solution on your behalf. The more information, the more accurate. The less, then they're guessing, or they're going to have to be led. They're going to have to be forced to have to guess and make educated guesses. So this could lead to them oversizing the solution just to avoid, right, undersizing the solution and having you coming back and say, hey, you undersized my solution, we're dropping packets, there's a performance hit, this is not a good solution. So you need to make sure that you understand the network the network tools that you have at your disposal to be able to gather those metrics. Because if you think you're going to be able to gather all those great metrics just from your firewall, think again. Most firewalls aren't able to provide the level of detail in terms of metrics that these vendors are going to need to size your solution. So you need to take in consideration some sort of network monitoring tool that can allow you to gather those metrics, including historical trends. In fact, that is just good business practice. You should have a tool that should be able to allow you to go say, how much of my traffic is encrypted today? And historically, what does that footprint look like from today versus a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? So that way you can develop not only metrics to help size your solution, but also prepare to size that solution to accommodate for future growth. And the only way you can really do that, right, is to have good metrics and a historical trending to be able to make that determination as to what does my growth pattern look like? What does my growth trend look like? And better enable the vendor to size an appropriate solution for you, saving you dollars, because they don't have to oversize it. They will size it specifically for your environment. It's a win-win situation. And the last topic here, last point, is going to be network address translation. You need to evaluate how network address translation impacts your SSL intercept solution. Some SSL intercept solutions will break if you perform network address translation while while the traffic is in that decrypted form, right? So once the SSL intercept appliance is decrypted to traffic, it has to have a way to keep track of the sessions that it decrypted. And network address translation could potentially break that depending on the solution. So you need to make sure you ask your vendor, hey, how do you address network address translation? Will it break my SSL intercept solution? Because if you want to feed your traffic to a next-gen firewall, and that's your perimeter firewall, and you traditionally do all your network address translation on your next-gen firewall, then there might be a change in the way you traditionally do things. For example, you may have to look at taking your physical firewall and logically carving it up into virtual contexts or virtual systems, right? Your own little virtual firewalls that live on a physical appliance. And so it could be to where the first context or virtual system, right, of that next-gen firewall performs all the threat inspection. And then after it goes through that SSL air gap, right, or that, after it's been decrypted, processed by your next-gen firewall, then re-encrypted, right, by the SSL intercept appliance for going along its merry way, then it flows through your next-gen firewall, your second next-gen firewall context or virtual system, that will perform the network address translation once it's outside of that SSL air gap architecture. So that might be a path you might have to take if natting impacts the SSL intercept capabilities. So it's something you want to bring up to your vendor and evaluate. So to wrap things up, where do you start? Well, first off, take in consideration, what direction do we want to intercept SSL? Do we want to do it inbound? Do we want to do it outbound? Do we want to do it both? And then take in consideration the requirements for doing either one. Then start evaluating what deployment method may make sense for you. Layer 2 or Layer 3. Maybe you're doing a edge redesign or building out a new data center. Well, then Layer 3 might not be so bad, right? We're already designing the network. And there's a lot of value in a Layer 3 deployment model in terms of scalability. Or you may be, hey, we have an existing network. We want to reduce the amount of possible disruption and overhead, right? We just need to get this appliance in there. Then maybe a Layer 2 deployment model makes more sense for you. Then review the common challenges with SSL and discuss that with the vendor of the SSL intercept solution that you're evaluating to understand how they're able to address those challenges so you have a good strategy going forward. And then take in consideration all the various technologies that we may need or use or may be of value when implementing an SSL intercept solution, such as an endpoint management system. Remember, in some cases, we may have to distribute certificates to our clients so that they trust the certificates that our subordinate CA is generating on the fly. Right? How about the network monitoring tools to help give us the trends that we need to understand our SSL footprint and historical trends? To take in consideration all the various technologies that we could have at our disposal to enhance our SSL intercept solution or strategy. So ladies and gentlemen, that's it. My name is Alex Vasquez. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you now better understand why SSL decryption matters. Thank you.